Rand Paul is making the initial statements that make it clear that he's going to be running for president in 2016. Let's see the statement. "I'm not going to deny that I'm interested," he says. Look, when they say I'm not running for president, that usually means they're running for president. If they're saying they can't deny that they're interested, they're definitely running for president.
Isn't that usually a bad idea?
To say that you are?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, they say that they're not for good reason, usually,
Right.
early on. And this is incredibly early.
It is incredibly early. I think that it's usually a bad idea, which makes me happy.
Yeah.
That he is shooting himself in the foot. Because I genuinely believe that he tries to pass himself off as a libertarian, when in reality, he is perfect example of a Republican.
Yeah.
I mean, especially when it comes to fiscal policy. So
There are a couple of areas, if you go searching, where he's different than standard just evangelical Republicans.
right, he
like,
wants
for instance,
to legalize marijuana.
Legalize marijuana, the willingness to make defense cuts. Actually, I want to go to a quote because he's both being somewhat reasonable by saying that we can cut defense, but the way he frames it, I find it quite offensive. He says, "How about another compromise in regard to the grand bargain that's going to come up? Republicans who think military spending, like myself, who think national defense is important, should compromise and say, you know what, not every dollar spent on the military is sacred. We can reduce the military spending. That's a compromise. Democrats should compromise also. Entitlements and welfare, the spending can come." Look, is he not merciful? He's willing to cut some of the insanely large budget from the military, as long as those poor and sick people also give something. And he's sort of reasonable for a Republican.
I mean, the non-military discretionary spending in this country is so minuscule, especially when you look at our federal budget. And I love how Republicans, and in a lot of cases libertarians, will look at that and say, oh yeah, we need to get rid of that because that creates government dependency, blah, blah, blah. Too much of our money is going toward that. And libertarian fiscal policy, I've said it before, I've said it, and I will say it again, is so juvenile. And as soon as someone comes at me with, we need to privatize everything, I mention a few things. Prisons. We've privatized some prisons in this country, and it's been a complete and utter disaster. Military. Why don't we privatize the military? We've partially done that already with private contractors, and it's been disastrous. What are we going to do? Also privatize fire departments and law enforcement? Is that going to be a good idea? Doubt it.
We could experiment.
Yeah, so it's just another way to make sure that the wealthiest people in this country don't have to pay taxes, while the middle class and the working class continue to suffer. And to have the naive notion that corporations and companies in this country are going to do the right thing out of the goodness of their hearts, I think that's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Corporations don't have morality. They're not going to do the right thing, especially when there's a profit motive.
Yeah. So you alluded in your initial response to this that he tries to portray himself as a libertarian, but he's actually just a standard Republican. I say, why don't we listen to a couple of his statements and see what the audience thinks after that. So let's go to this first video. He's talking about Obama's, whether he has a mandate or not.
It's not a mandate. I mean, he wins by a couple of points. And really, some of it I think we haven't really completely finished the discussion on. For example, are rich people paying their fair share? Well, they're paying about half of their income. What's enough?
No.
So on taxes, that sounds like anything any Republicans might say. Why don't we move on to the second one, actually?
We have the lowest corporate tax rate of any other industrialized country because of tax loopholes. So what he just said right there is complete and utter bullshit.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I don't disagree with that, but let's go on to the second video. See, is he a libertarian or is he just another Republican?
Do you think that Republicans here are ultimately going to have to cave to the president on higher taxes?
If that's our message, we'll get smaller and smaller as a party. Our message should be, as it always has been, we want to grow the economy, we want more jobs.
Because that's what's happened over the last,
Over Bush's term.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's true. Now, we do have one video where he does draw a distinction between himself and all of the other major potential Republicans running for 2016. Let's go to this third video.
The states should be allowed to make a lot of these decisions. I want things to be decided more on a local basis with more compassion. I think it would make us as Republicans different.
What about gay marriage, abortion? These were two other issues that really seemed to get the Republicans tangled up in knots this last election.
I think some of those can be decided more at the state level.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's
basically,
a good point, the way you worded it.
Yeah.
It sounds all nice, but I mean, let's be honest. We know what abortion laws are in place in a lot of these states, and we know what gay marriage laws are like in these states. And so the response is, well, they have some horrible laws that limit people's rights, civil rights. I'm not going to do anything about that. You have to be active sometimes if you're an elected official. You have to speak for people who don't have a voice. And if you just go, you don't have a voice, I'm not going to say anything for you, you're a bad guy.
Yep.
Can we mention the one last section he did say? Because, of course, as we mentioned earlier, this is what you mentioned for a minute. or the compromise needs to come from this. Oh yeah, you know, we can bring down some military spending, but at the end of it all, it's the same message. As you said, we don't need to change anything. Are you going to look to do anything on tax rates? Hell no. I'm not going to do anything. So in other words, that means I'm not doing anything. Let's just go back to that's the heart of the Republican stance. Not doing anything on taxes. So you think they're going to try and change something on military spending when everybody is bowing to military spending? Go, oh my God, we're going to die if we do that. Nothing. He's planning to do nothing.
Well, I mean, when you really look at libertarian ideology, when it comes to the things that really matter, they're just like Republicans. When it comes to fiscal policy, they're just like Republicans. I mean, Ron Paul is, I'm sorry?
More extreme even in some cases.
Yeah, way more extreme than Republicans in some cases. But, you know, when it comes to foreign policy, I think that they are on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where they're just like, you know, like Ron Paul. He's a bit of an isolationist. He just doesn't want to get involved in anything, which, you know, you need your allies when it comes to foreign policy. So, anyway.
Yeah.
Now it's a completely different topic.
They've run conservatives like McCain, Romney. Everybody along the way on the Republican side has been thinking, like especially the younger Republicans, like let's try a libertarian. And now at this point, perhaps in 2016, after losing a couple of times, maybe they will actually try that. And so they're going to try, if they do that, to pick someone who can try to appeal to young voters and things like that. Look, I'm so reasonable when it comes to same-sex marriage and pot legalization. But let's bear in mind, as few, I don't want to talk bad about Ron Paul supporters because they're just going to ream me, but he'll also eliminate the Department of Education. There's tons of crazy things that they want.
Really,
let's just bear that in mind.
I think it's a perfect example of a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? Because you can lure in the young voters with the issues that are very important to them now. And one of the reasons why Republicans, especially Tea Party members of Congress, one of the reasons why they lost is because of their social conservatism. So it's very, very alluring, and it's very exciting to have, you know, this third party come in and say, like, I'm going to legalize the marijuana, and I'm going to be in favor of same-sex marriage, and I'm going to give you what you want. But then all of a sudden, like, I'm going to get rid of the Department of Education. I'm going to get rid of taxes across the board, which will defund everything that's important. I'm going to privatize the most important aspects of society, including law enforcement, fire department, prisons. It's a bad idea.
The one thing that I think you're wrong on is I don't think anybody watched that video and thought that he was alluring or exciting in his tiny little hallway.
Well, he's not particularly alluring, but I think it would be wrong to say that Ron Paul wasn't. I mean, there was a lot of excitement around Ron Paul, especially when it came to young people. And while I do think it's important to be supportive of a third-party candidate, look, I voted for Jill Stein. Okay, because I had the luxury of voting for Jill Stein, and I wish that she had a fair shot at becoming a candidate and, you know, a president. But you also can't ignore one of the most critical elements of someone's ideology. And if you don't like the Republican Party, well, I mean, libertarians are very similar when it comes to fiscal policy, and as you mentioned, in a lot of ways more extreme.